a quick intro here.
Yeah, sounds good.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone who's taken the time to join us today. We're super excited, Lauren and I both joined together for this presentation today. My name is Sydney. I'm here today representing Profitual. So we're a startup company that focuses predominantly on financial forecasting with other early stage founders. So certainly growing alongside of you and all of the finance challenges that you're experiencing as you grow your business. And something that a conversation that we end up having with lots of the founders that we work with is around SR&ED capital and leveraging it for growth, how it's included in your growth strategy, how it can be used to fuel additional runway in your company and pieces like that. So when Lauren and I met just, gosh, maybe like 6 months ago now,
Yeah.
was really excited to find the opportunity for us to collaborate, where we work with similar groups of startups and introduce kind of a new opportunity for some of the folks that we're working with on the forecasting side at Profitual.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Sid. So yeah, I'm Lauren Valier. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of GrowWise. So we are a SR&ED tax credit consulting firm using AI to simplify access to SR&ED and maximize SR&ED claims. And so, yeah, as Sydney mentioned, we're going to be talking about using SR&ED to build a smarter growth strategy. So we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of SR&ED for no matter what stage you're at, early stage, all the way up to larger companies. So hopefully everyone here can get something useful out of today's webinar. Kind of wanted to start us off. If you could just pop a quick little intro into the chat, name, company, what you do, maybe where you're located today, build some rapport. Maybe you find a new connection, add a LinkedIn connection from today's webinar, trying to get as much use out of this hour as possible. So yeah, feel free to pop a little hello into the chat and get some conversation started there as well. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to add anything into the chat as well.
Yeah, I'll be monitoring that for us. We've got chat functionality. We're also going to be leveraging the Q&A functionality. We're going to do our best here to leave some time at the end for open Q&A. I don't know about you, Lauren, but if you've got a burning question in the middle of the presentation, please feel free to jump in with it then in the Q&A. I'm going to monitor that throughout, and I'll be sure to prompt Lauren so that we can get to your questions kind of as quickly as possible. We're also going to be leveraging some polls to hopefully keep this session interactive for you, and also ensure that throughout we're adjusting the content to keep it relevant for the industries and audience that we have with us today. So, by all means, sit back with a coffee if that's what you're here for. But we've also got some things planned to try to keep this entertaining for you.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're going to kick it off with a poll. So we're going to do a quick SR&ED check-in. So there's going to be a poll hopefully come up on your screen. So it's going to kick that off. And this is just to get a better understanding of kind of who's in the room in terms of if you're familiar with SR&ED, if you don't even know what SR&ED stands for, kind of where you're at, if you've done SR&ED internally, if you've worked with a consultant, if you've done something in the past with SR&ED, but not doing anything right now, just to get us a better sense of kind of where we're at. It's funny, sometimes the room ends up being filled with people that are completely new to SR&ED, and that way we can steer the conversation a certain way, and vice versa. Sometimes it's people that are all very experienced and know a lot. So yeah, just good to get a sense of kind of who's in the room.
We've got lots of answers coming in here, Lauren, just jumping around all over the place. Really, really interesting results here. Definitely
Perfect.
looks like, yeah, we've got over half of the folks in this call have never filed SR&ED before. So it'll be really interesting context for us to kind of like set up the foundation of SR&ED. And then kind of we've got a 50-50 split between folks that are either working with a SR&ED consultant, who are repeat founders and, they've been through the SR&ED process before, but this is their first time with their existing company.
Okay.
The industry is, growing a lot. We've got some new tips to share with everyone.
Yeah, that's great. We've tried to build this webinar out so there's something useful kind of no matter what stage you're at. So it's good to know we've kind of got people across the board, but a bit of a majority there in the earlier, newer to SR&ED kind of category. Awesome. So for a quick agenda, we're going to do a bit of SR&ED 101, understanding the program and your options. We're going to talk about an example SR&ED situation, a company that kind of an example company we see often and how we work with them to maximize the claim. We're going to talk about SR&ED for growth and building a growth plan around SR&ED, and then some tips and Q&A. But as we mentioned, if you have a question, a burning question, kind of pop that in the chat or jump in and we can address that as it comes up. Perfect. So a bit about SR&ED. If you're not familiar, SR&ED stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. It's Canada's largest tax credit. It's roughly $4 billion annually dispersed to Canadian companies through the CRA from the federal government as well as provincial governments. It's a tax credit, but that's a little bit of an intimidating language. It basically is a grant as long as you're incorporated and doing the correct type of work, which I'll get into in a minute. It's a cash refund that you get injected into your business for innovative work. So you can get a refund for up to 2/3 of your eligible research and development costs. It's essential non-dilutive funding for startups and scale-ups. And the goal of SR&ED is really to ease the financial load on Canadian businesses that are doing innovative work. So it is a very Canadian, very patriotic program. Everything that you do has to happen in Canada, whether that's salaries, materials, or contractors. Those are kind of the three buckets of expenses that can get reimbursed through the SR&ED program. And they all need to be incurred in Canada. Perfect. So a bit more about what work qualifies. So research and development is super broad. SR&ED specifically is more about solving technical problems, solving technical uncertainties, so creating or improving products, processes, or technologies. It's less about the goal of the work and more about how the work is done. So if you're solving a technical challenge with systematic and experimental work and iterative work, that's really what SR&ED is meant to fund. So you don't need to succeed. The project can be all about learning, trying, and failing, but you do need to have lessons learned throughout that project. So if the project is experimental in nature and you're testing something new and learning and kind of iterating as you go, that's kind of the perfect criteria for SR&ED. So a bit more about who is eligible. Canadian companies, all the work must take place in Canada. For the salaried employees, they must be located in Canada. The materials must be used or tested on in Canada, and contractors must be Canadian businesses. So you have to be spending money. This is a common kind of question. Sid's going to go into this in a second here, but the way that SR&ED works is you incur expenses throughout the year. Sorry about that. You incur expenses throughout the year, and then at the end of the year, you get a refund for the expenses that you paid out during the year. So you have to be spending money to be eligible for R&D for SR&ED, sorry. So if you're a little earlier on in the process and you don't actually have any expenses yet, then you probably are too early to be eligible for SR&ED. So if there's no expenses to be reimbursed, then there's no SR&ED claim there. And SR&ED is completely industry agnostic. It can be specifically the three most common industries are tech, pharmaceutical, and manufacturing, but it can be really across the board, anywhere where there's innovation, where there's new work and technical problems being solved. And that leads me to my fourth point, which is solving problems. You must be aiming to solve a technical problem. It's not about solving business challenges, marketing, sales, growth problems. It specifically does have to be a technical challenge that you're solving in the work or attempting to solve in the work.
Lauren, maybe on this spending money piece, just before I move on, because I know in kind of our day-to-day at Profitual, helping companies even like think about their expenses and think about the expenses they incur when we're chatting with folks at the earliest stage, a lot of expenses don't feel real, or perhaps, you're in the work part-time or you've just started and you're not actually tracking your expenses quite diligently. You've bought a couple pieces of software. Maybe you're not paying yourself as, a technical co-founder of the business. You're not drawing a salary. I find this is a scenario that lots of businesses who are looking for capital efficient ways to run their business find themselves in. And I would just be curious to know, like, at what point that company transitions into a shreddable company.
Yeah.
What are some of those activities that they would have to start thinking about doing?
Yeah, for sure. I would say it's never too soon to be thinking about SR&ED. We have conversations with startups all the time that are like one or two person startups, early days, not paying themselves a salary, don't have any true expenses yet. Like you said, maybe a little bit of software or a little bit of expenses there, but it's never too early to be thinking about SR&ED. So planning around how SR&ED is going to impact your cash flow. So it's great to start that from early days around tracking your time a little bit better. The more information you have around what you're spending your time on, the better. And as soon as really you start having large, substantial expenses is when it's really important to have that solid tracking and solid information about your work. So once you start paying your technical team, whether that be yourself as a founder or a developer or an engineer, once you start paying them a salary, that's really essential to be documenting what those folks are doing. And then kind of the same thing goes with contractors or material costs. So once they get to the point where, money's adding up to thousands, tens of thousands, that's really when the shred should be, really in the forefront of people's brains. So thinking about how you're tracking that and how that correlates to how much you're going to get back, it's important to know that as those expenses go from the hundreds into the thousands into the tens of thousands.
Awesome. So maybe in summary, like a good signal for some of the folks here who are new to Shred, kind of a checklist, if you will, for them is like, am I paying someone, whether it be a technical salary or a technical contractor? And do I have like defensible documentation for what projects these individuals are spending their time on so that I can validate that their time is being spent to solve a technical problem?
Yeah, 100%. If you're still in really early days and your company is spending a lot of the time just solving business problems, like doing, the 1 million tasks required to have a startup, it's hard to prove that, you're doing a lot of shred in those days. Once you get to the point where there's a technical problem you're solving beyond just like UX, UI, or, small things in your day to day, once there gets to be the point where there's larger issues at hand and you're solving those and iterating, testing, redesigning, that is really when it's a good time to start prioritizing shred.
Awesome.
Yeah. Perfect. So we're going to pop another quick poll in the chat just to get a better sense of the industry that you guys are in. So if you could just do a quick response, you can keep it broad, like tech, or you can get specific, ag tech, health tech, whatever, or manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, whatever industry you're in, just to get a better sense of kind of the examples that we can talk to a bit more.
Awesome. Those are coming in. I know we've got people have to type. You can't just click a button, so I'll give you a couple other minutes here.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, in general, I mean the type of work that's going to be eligible, sorry, is around the solving of those problems. So in manufacturing, that can look like prototyping, testing new hardware technology. Um, in general, it's troubleshooting technical issues without a clear solution, building custom software or internal tools. And then this kind of applies across the board, improving speed, accuracy, or scalability of a system, whether that be an AI platform or a physical machine in manufacturing. Improvements and technical challenges associated with that process can definitely be eligible for shred.
Awesome. And in terms of responses, we're a little bit over the board. We've got SaaS, we've got mobility, we've got geomatics, we've got ag. We're a little bit everywhere.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that's great to know. There's a variety of people in the room, so yeah, good to know. In general, I think with the tech side of it, we do see a lot of projects around um, kind of the performance issues with softwares and platforms. Um, in manufacturing or in mobility, geomatics, I'm not sure kind of what the product is there, but if it is a physical product, if there's materials associated with the testing, prototyping, manufacturing processes, material costs can be eligible. I will mention the salary portion of shred is by far the most lucrative. So you can get up to 2/3 of your expenses back for salaries. For materials and contractors, it's a little bit less lucrative. So it's around 40%. It does depend on the province. It's around 40% that you get back as a refund for those expenses. So it's a good thing to understand. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the example. But yeah, there's a million examples of what's eligible for shred. It is less so, like I mentioned, less so to do with the goal of the work and more so to do with how the work takes place. So if you're doing a lot of design, or sorry, a lot of testing, iterations, improvements, a lot of learning, if it's messy, we say SRED funds the struggle. So it's a little bit crude, but if there's a struggle and there's something that's not obvious and you have to work at it a lot, that's ding ding ding, that's great for SRED. So unfortunately, it's not fun to struggle, but it's great for SRED. So there you go. Awesome. Pass it over to you, Sid.
Yeah, conversation I have a lot with founders around cash flow forecasting, which I think is increasingly more relevant in Canada's marketplace today, is how should SRED be factored into my growth strategy or my cash flow planning? Just want to make sure that everyone is kind of level set on what actually accessing SRED capital looks like. Because if you were to do a quick Google search for capital resources for startups in Canada, SRED programs across the board, SRED consultants, SRED companies are going to be one of the first Google hits you see. And as Lauren mentioned, I mean, the ability to get up to 2/3 back on salaries for your R&D team for a lot of like technical teams growing and solving technical challenges, it's a massive boost of cash. But we want to ensure that founders are thinking about this in the most, I don't want to say conservative, but perhaps the most pragmatic way so that you aren't relying on SRED capital to essentially continue to fuel runway for your company. It should be really looked at as a growth opportunity, as additional capital to allow you to grow faster, allow you to hire faster, and not something that is going to, keep the lights on for you in early days. And I'll kind of explain this timeline for you, and perhaps that'll make more sense. So in practice, filing for SRED is done after you've completed your year-end tax statements. And so this is one of the reasons why when we run that poll about, well, who is doing your SRED internally, or sorry, who is doing your SRED? Some folks are talking about, are they hiring a consultant? Are they working with an accountant? Do you have an accountant who's also looking at your year-end tax statements? Because in practice, lots of companies will try to get these kind of wrapped up at the same time. You have, I believe, up to 18 months after the end of your year. So if you wrap up your year-end statements, and maybe you just finished wrapping up year-end statements and you're thinking to yourself, well, I didn't claim SRED this year yet. That's okay. You still have time to go and do so. But I guess the moral of the story here is that the sooner that you can submit your claim, the sooner you're going to receive your capital. This is all based on kind of the influx of applications that need to be reviewed. Of course, if you're submitting a claim for the first time, it may fall under like additional scrutiny. There's a potential that it could be flagged for further review from CRA. But generally speaking, we're seeing companies hear back about their SRED claims and starting to receive that capital around 2 to 3 months. We're based in Atlantic Canada. I don't believe that has anything to do with it, but I will tell you that one piece I notice at Profitual, where we service companies across Canada, is that maybe our audience doesn't directly align with the statistic that 70% of companies operate with a December year end. We are all over the place with the companies that we support at Profitual. And so if you think about the number of companies that are finishing and wrapping up their year-end statements, their year ends in December, they're kind of doing their year-end bookkeeping and cleaning up their books in January, February, perhaps applying for or filing their SRED claim in March. If the majority of companies are operating on this calendar, well, the majority of claims are being kind of processed around the same calendar, and this is or the same month, and this is going to create a backlog in that process. From a forecasting perspective, I love a December year end. I think it makes lots of things easier from an interpretation standpoint. But that being said, if you do find yourself in this situation, you may notice that it takes a little bit longer for your SRED claim to be processed, depending on how quickly you're able to submit that claim. The reason that I kind of want to bring up this process is because as startup founders that are applying for grants, loans, and other forms of non-dilutive funding across Canada, I think we're all familiar with the fact that this cash is we never receive it overnight. There's always an application process. There's always time to receive this capital. And the scariest pitfall for a founder, a place for a founder to find themselves in is relying on successfully receiving a grant or successfully receiving, R&D credit, your SRED credit back in order to sustain your company and in order to fuel runway moving forward. so if you're operating today, you're thinking, hey, I've only got 1 or 2 months left of operating runway before I completely run out of cash. I'm going to apply for SRED, to try to extend that runway. I can't guarantee for you that that cash is going to be in hand in the time that you need it. Your time and your energy and your effort is likely much better spent on activities that could generate that capital for you faster, whether that's revisiting your forecast and figuring out which expenses you could cut, whether that's reviewing, unfortunately, like team and which people that you might have to let go of to try to preserve some of that cash, or whether it's jumping in and focusing on sales and revenue generating activities. The SRED claim process is unpredictable. And you really should conservatively leave yourself between 3 and 6 months in order to receive that capital back.
Yeah, I love that point about the 18 months. You are correct. It is 18 months you need. You can claim kind of after the fact. So even if you had a December or have a December 31st year end, it's not too late now even to claim for 2023 as well as 2024. So that's where a lot of companies kind of find that instant benefit of SRED. Well, not instant like we talked about, it does take time, but if you had never claimed SRED before, then now you can claim for 2 years going back. That can be a really great kind of boost for companies. So, yeah, but always give yourself the time. It's not instant. If you get reviewed, that can extend the timeline. A SRED review can be very simple, just a couple documents reviewed, or it can be a full-fledged audit where it's a bit of a deep dive. One of the great benefits of having a SRED consultant is they will support you through that. Or hopefully they will support you. At GrowWise, we do support you throughout that audit process. But yeah, that can add to your timeline as well. So it's good to understand what that looks like. And perfect. So because a little bit more than half of the folks in the room today are new to SRED, we're going to talk a bit about the SRED ecosystem and kind of the options for filing SRED. So the first option is preparing SRED internally. I'm going to talk a bit more about them on the next slide, but that's kind of the first option. And then the second is hiring a SRED consultant. So within the SRED consultant world, there are a lot of options. There's specifically sort of the big accounting firms, and then there's the specific SRED consultants. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here, about the pros and cons of each. So the reason there's so many options out there is because it's not really a one size fits all. It really does what's best for your company. It depends on where you're at, what your priorities are, what your values are. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these, but yeah, just kind of know that there's not a one size fits all. Doing SRED internally, the best benefit obviously is it saves you money. You don't need to pay a consultant. The most obvious downside is that you need internal SRED expertise. You need someone dedicated to identifying SRED projects, to writing your SRED claim, to managing that process. And inherently, unless you have someone on your team already that's an expert in SRED, that's much higher risk
Something
without using, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying something on this that I wonder if you see it the same with the folks that you work with. Just to your point again about being able to go back 18 months, a lot of our companies kind of think about doing SRED internally as like, is this the best use of my time? And forego it until they're at a place where working with someone like GrowWise or working with a SRED consultant makes sense, and they're able to kind of employ that individual to go back and also claim that additional year's worth of credits. I
Yeah.
find that's probably the most common avenue that we see with the early stage companies that we support.
Mhm.
I'm curious, like, is that kind of what you see as well?
Yeah, we do really often work with companies that have never claimed SRED before, have a lot of eligible work, but just have not prioritized that as an internal use of their time. And so we go back and we do 2 years at once. And that is such a great way to get a lot of money at one time because you're going back 2 years, you're claiming quite a lot of expenses in the same time. So yeah, that's pretty common. We see that a lot as well, where companies have just decided, it's not worth my time to struggle through this and to do probably a B plus at best job. So we'll just push it off and then work with a consultant in the future. The one thing we do know that happens sometimes is that if you continuously do this, I mean, you can only go back 18 months, right? So if you're a company that's been around since, say, 2018, 2020, like your 2020, 2021, 2022, all of those years expenses are just down the drain now. So you can only go back 18 months. Yes, 18 months is great. That's awesome that they've done that with the SRED program, but don't push it off for too long is my point, because you are losing money if you don't claim SRED.
A great point.
Yeah. And so then kind of the second option people go with is the large accountant. So this is Deloitte, EY, KPMG, etc. The great part about these companies is they're low risk and they're a one-stop shop. So they often do other tax services in their packages. And so for larger businesses that maybe have more, are a little bit more risk averse and want simplicity, this can often be a great way to kind of just, do everything at once and be a little lower risk. The cons of this is they're often charging much higher rates to do the SRED consulting. So these consultants are, it does depend on the case, but typically charging between 20 and 30% of your SRED claim to do the consulting fees or do the consulting work. And then the downside as well is there's typically a lot of time and effort required. We talk to a lot of clients that worked with large accountants, and what they get from their accountant is basically a booklet and with tens and tens of pages of questions that their team then has to go and fill out and answer, what exact work did you do? And they're writing things out, and it takes a lot of time to make sure that information is all correct, run it up and down the ladder within your company, make sure it all, sounds correct, sounds right. It's all, got a neat bow on it, just to pass that back to the accountant for them to tie it up in a pretty package and submit to the CRA. So it's a lot of work and time required on your company to do it this way,
There's 2 points.
especially if it's, I was just going to say, especially if you're new to SRED and it's kind of the first time you're filing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I think I'm going to echo on my end. I feel like I've cut you off now twice. It's certainly not my intention over here.
No
There's
worries.
2 points on that though that I really would love to that just got me thinking. One was on we frequently see founders looking for almost like a finance function or an accountant that kind of can do it all. And I know from an FP&A perspective, we're constantly trying to suggest to people, as much as that feels simple, that like handoff of like, I just want to drop this to one person and have them handle everything, that having multiple players with niche expertise, you're going to ensure that you're getting like really relevant, deep expertise in how they're supporting you, how they're helping you. If we're talking about the example here of one of the major accounting firms, where in that situation you may just be one of another number working with some of the other more specific solutions. They're likely diving in to understand your business a little bit better. Yeah, I just like wanted to echo that it's another risk from a finance or an FP&A perspective that we see as well with startups, where this shortcut of just trying to find one person who can do everything ends up hurting you in the long run. The other point that you had mentioned around the actual business model of these people. So, you mentioned that the accountants and how expensive it is based on the fees that they take for the claim and pieces like that. I think it would be important to potentially touch on that as well, just with the other, for the accounting firms and with the others, like how does that generally work with SRED?
Yeah, in general, like how the payment process works, is that?
Yeah.
Yes, great question. I should have brought that up as well, knowing there's some people that are new to it in the room. So typically, what I'd say about 80% of SRED consultants do is we do contingency fees. So we only get paid if you get paid, and we get paid a percentage of the total SRED refund at the end of the process once the CRA has paid you back for your SRED claim. So some companies will charge upfront fees, some will charge just an upfront fee and a contingency fee. Like some of the larger accountants have a bit more complex models. We charge just a contingency fee, no upfront fees for any consulting service or any questions or meetings, consultations in the beginning. And then we charge a contingency fee at the end of the process. And that's kind of most consultants do it for two reasons. And the first is to make sure that everyone's aligned that the claim is as large as possible. And the second being that everyone's aligned that the claim is a good, strong claim, because nobody makes any money if the claim gets denied by the CRA. And so that's typically how it works. So you would get the refund from the CRA after, maybe we said around 2 to 3 months. It is a huge range. It can be 2 weeks, it can be 6 months, but typically it's around 2 to 3 months. And so you get the refund back from the CRA, and then you'd pay a percentage to your SR&ED consultant for the work they did.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure. So just getting a bit into the third option, which is the SR&ED specific firms. So this is names like Boast, Bond, RDP. There are a lot out there. Like I said, there's a lot of people in this space. That's because there are so many companies claiming SR&ED. It is a huge industry. About 80% of claims, 80% of companies that file SR&ED use a SR&ED consultant. So it's very typical to use a SR&ED consultant. The 20% is typically very large companies that have a whole internal team that do the SR&ED claim. But most companies are hiring a consultant to do that work for them. So there's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of companies doing this. So what they offer is typically lower costs than the large accounting firms. And as Sydney was mentioning, that SR&ED expertise. So like she was saying, that one-stop shop feels easy, but you are likely missing out on a little bit of that expertise at each stage of the process if you're going for one kind of, a jack of all trades. Working with someone that does SR&ED as their whole business is often a great way to maximize your claim and have it be a stronger claim. Like the Deloittes of the world, the SR&ED industry for them is about 1% of their total business, roughly, depending on the company, but it is by no means their focus point. So they are not focused on innovating or making the process easier for their clients. So working with a SR&ED specific consultant, that's their bread and butter. And the downside of working with those SR&ED specific firms, typically the process is still very manual. So that might look like a lot of meetings, that might still look like that booklet, but it's still a lot of the work on the client. We have, those folks have sector-specific expertise. So some SR&ED consultants will be just for tech companies, just for manufacturing companies. And then they're only doing SR&ED, no other tax services, so it's not that one-stop shop. So just a little bit about what we do at GrowWise and why we're different. So we've built an AI-driven platform and combined that with our team of experts to really focus on the pain points of SR&ED, which is how much time it takes, and not having maximized claim. So we've built this solution. We have AI that reviews all documents that our clients upload documents to our platform. We have AI review them and do a preliminary project proposal from there. So we're completely sector agnostic. We can help businesses in any sector. And we have that claim maximization technology, AI using to scan all documents and understand where missed opportunities are and where there's expenses that aren't currently being claimed, or where there might be even a whole project that isn't currently being claimed. And so that's really the pain points that we've tried to solve, is the effort, the time, and the lack of claim maximization. And so we also only do SR&ED. I mean, we help with digital media tax credits and clean tech tax credits as well, but we're not like a full accountant service package. And so that's just a bit about, everyone. We recently posted a blog kind of about choosing the SR&ED consultant that works for you based on your values. There isn't a one-stop shop. As much as, I could tell you GrowWise is the best for every person, it's probably not true. There are other consultants, accountants, that are going to be the best option for each individual business. It's just what's important to you, your risk, adversity, and everything about how your business runs. So there's someone out there for you. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to get into the example SR&ED situation. So just for the sake of, providing a bit more of a personal touch, we're going to do an example company. So company X, they're a B2B SaaS company using AI to streamline and simplify the delivery process. So they're a 6-person team. They've got a CEO, CTO, developer, an engineer, and then a marketing and a salesperson. And currently they're doing SR&ED internally. So that's their situation, a little bit about them. So what this looks like is around 200,000 in salaries to the developer and the engineer, 100K each, we'll call it. This process is currently difficult to track. So who's identifying the SR&ED projects? How are they being tracked? What's the time tracking? There's a lot of uncertainty around those processes. There's not a clear description of those processes. So there's obviously missed opportunities coming from that. They're claiming 2 projects at 20% of the technical time. And this is because, there's uncertainty around who's identifying those projects, how they're being tracked, and they're spending 50 plus man hours preparing the shred claim. You might think that's a lot. It is. We have seen this exact situation time and time again. So even if you're doing shred with a consultant, there's still a chance that these problem points are coming up for you. So these are just kind of the struggles we see a lot with businesses that are doing it internally or even working with other consultants is, maybe not all the time that they should be claiming is being claimed, and it's taking a lot of time to prevent that claim at the end of the year. And so where we come in is we have the tools both on our team and on an AI kind of tool platform level to do eligibility assessments. So we can actually support the understanding of what is eligible and allowing companies to improve their general or improve the size of their claim by understanding more about what's eligible. We've got a SR&ED calculator that's just free on our website, which is great if you're early stage and you maybe don't have these expenses yet. You can actually use this more of as like a predictor to understand what the impact of your expenses will be and how SR&ED relates to all of that. So going back to this company, their current situation was 2 projects, 20% of the technical time, 20% of 200,000, that's 40,000 in shreddable salaries. And so that at 2/3 being refundable comes out to about a $26,000 SR&ED refund, which is great. That's a good little bump in your cash. And it takes about 50 hours to prepare the claim. We work with clients to really understand their SR&ED situation and maximize their claim, simplify the process, and to create this situation where they have now one more project that they weren't ever even claiming before because they didn't have that understanding of what was eligible. So there's another project. It's come to light that 50% of the technical time was eligible. So because those question marks around time tracking and how projects were justified, it's now shown that 50% of the time is eligible. So that's 100K in shreddable salaries, equaling just over 65, almost $66,000 in SR&ED refund. So improving that SR&ED refund by almost 40,000, and that whole process is taking roughly 5 hours to prepare the claim. So that's kind of where we fit into this picture. I will quickly show this SR&ED calculator and kind of how that tool works. So this is our website. We're going to assume this company's in Ontario. They're incorporated. That does have an impact on SR&ED. If you're not incorporated, you do get significantly less SR&ED back. So we'll say there's 100,000. Is that 1, 2 many zeros? Yeah. Perfect. Because they're a B2B SaaS, there's no materials transformed or consumed. We're going to say they don't have any contractor expenses either, just for simplicity. You have the option to include other government grants like IRAP. If you did have that funding, you could put it in here. We'll say they didn't, and then view the results. So based on this, with $100,000 expenses, as I mentioned, you're going to be getting a total of almost $66,000 in SR&ED refund. And this tool is great if you already understand kind of what's going to be eligible. You can put in that information of, here's what I think my expenses will be in a forecasting perspective, or to understand how large your claim could be. Awesome. I'll pass it over to you, Sydney.
Yeah, we did get a comment or a question earlier about receiving the slides and receiving links. We'll make sure at the end of this of our presentation today, we're going to drop some really quick links, maybe some of the ones that are more top of mind, access to kind of book calls with us or chat a little bit further. We'll also make sure that we send an email out to everyone with some of these other really helpful links to tools and things like that so that you can reference them at a later date. I'll just make sure to note that for us.
Awesome. Thanks.
Oh, no worries. I'm going to jump into the cash flow impacts of the exact same scenario that Lauren just went through, because that company that is spending 200K a year on their tech team is just getting started, looking to perhaps transition from doing SR&ED internally to working with someone like GrowWise. Like, that scenario represents so many of the early stage, technical startups that we work with at Profitual that are trying to understand the impact of SR&ED on how they think about growing and scaling their company in a strategic way. So I've pulled out the exact same scenario. We've got that 200K spend. What I've done next is use some of the same values that Lauren provided based on how much they were spending monthly on R&D, net of what they were getting back from SR&ED. So that means that we're taking all of that monthly salary spend, and we're subtracting, if we took that SR&ED claim, divided it over the full year, what does that actually look like on a monthly basis from an expense perspective? And I've got the difference here between kind of our current scenario and our maximized situation. Month over month, depending on where you're at in your startup journey, that 3.3 thousand, so just almost 3,500 in monthly cash gained may or may not feel significant for you. But what I love to do is look at this from a runway perspective. If you assume that, this company, the majority of their, 80% of startup salaries or startup expenses in the early days are on salaries for folks building in the B2B SaaS space. That's a lot of technical expense. Let's, round up and assume that on average, this company was spending, burning $20,000 a month. In this maximized situation, again, they're getting more capital back from the increased SR&ED claim. They've brought their monthly net burn down to just over 16 and a half. If we look at the difference over the year of how much cash you're now getting back from SR&ED, in this example, our sample company has actually added 2.5 months of runway if they didn't change anything in their plan, if they continued to operate, if they didn't hire. That's 2.5 months of additional cash that you've now had injected into your year to be able to operate. And that's not insignificant, particularly for folks at the earliest stage. I know when we're working at Profitual with companies, like these metrics around runway and cash in the bank are the drivers that are keeping founders plugged into wanting to understand, how much longer they have to operate until they run out of cash. How can I decrease how much I'm burning on a monthly basis? So a really, really critical example here. I just wanted to play it out for you of what does that actually look like in terms of providing your business a little bit more operating wiggle room? I've got another real life example for you, a company that we've worked with at Profitual. Again, in this current situation, just were unaware. They were doing SR&ED internally. They were unaware of everything that could be tracked and could be claimed, and they ended up going from a $200,000 actual claim that they were getting back every year to close to a $950,000 claim every year. It was significant.
That's so like game changing for that company, truly.
Absolutely. And to your point about what I love to see about your tools for the folks on the call that I'd mentioned that they hadn't claimed SR&ED before, it is just that awareness of what is shreddable. It always feels like a chicken and the egg scenario of, well, how do I set up the proper infrastructure to track if I don't know what activities I should be tracking? So I love that you guys both have that calculator tool, but then also a little bit of that eligibility opportunity for companies to just dive into that a little bit better. Because in this scenario, it was just a company doing it internally, not being aware of some of the other things that could be SR&ED eligible for them. And yeah, significant injection of runway for them.
Yeah, we see that example all the time. So great to hear you've got, some situations like that as well at Profitual. So quickly kind of circling back to the point, kind of all of this is talking about SR&ED and growth. So we've got 4 questions here around how you can strategically think about SR&ED in the growth lens. So these are questions that are applicable whether you want to think about this in your internal team, whether you want to take these questions to your consultant if you're working with one, or if you want to set up a quick call with me to go through these and talk about this. But these are the questions that we find makes the most impact on how SR&ED can be maximized and used for growth. So on your project identification, who is doing that? Specifically, who in the team and when in the process does that happen? If you have your CTO doing your SR&ED internally, but the SR&ED work itself is happening 4 levels below them at a developer level, there's 100% going to be there's going to be a miscommunication there, and there's going to be lost opportunities. So whether that comes from educating your whole team or, having a different level, maybe it's a project manager or, a director involved in those SR&ED conversations, if you don't understand who's identifying and when that's happening, if it's sort of just happening willy-nilly, you are, I guarantee you, missing out on shred money. That kind of brings me to my next point, which is around tracking time. The more data you have, the more shred you will get. If you can justify that you are spending 30% versus 40%, 50%, like the more information you have about your time, the more you can prove that you're spending it on shred. And then if you got into an audit situation, you wouldn't be, your shred claim wouldn't be reduced. It would be, you could justify that very strongly. So tracking your time, I know it's unrealistic to ask for hourly tracking for a lot of employees. Some employees do that already, and it's great. We kind of say like a weekly or bi-weekly percentage base is great for shred. So it's still annoying, yes, but it takes literally 5 minutes every other Friday. Put it in your calendars. Okay, this week and last week, what percentage of my time was I working on this project versus that project versus just admin work, right? So having your team do that, it's going to save you money. It's going to get you more money back. So it's worthwhile in the long run. Around your shred strategy, if you're kind of just going about your business day to day, not thinking too much about the strategy behind shred, you aren't taking full advantage of the program. Like I mentioned, employee salaries get 60+% back through the shred program, whereas contractors get around 40%. If you're not thinking strategically about when you're hiring versus when you're hiring an employee versus a contractor, it's something that deserves attention to think about, especially in the early days. And then the other one that we see is really useful for a lot of companies is around incentivizing to your employees around identifying projects and tracking time for projects around shred. So may sound silly, but something like even a gift card to your employees, or a bonus, a Christmas bonus, or an extra day off, like things that are tangible for employees. First of all, builds great culture, but second of all, if you incentivize, if you track your hours better, or if you do more shred work, you get an X amount of cash, or some sort of benefit. Your employees, you're building that shred culture into your business, and you will 100% increase the size of your shred claim, and likely giving out a couple hundred or even a couple $1,000s in incentives to your employees will pay off twofold in how much larger your shred claim can be. And then that last point is around shred efficiency. So like we talked about before, questioning, is this process the best use of your time? If you're doing it internally, or even if you're working with a consultant that puts a lot of the work on you, is this the best use of your time? Could you be spending your time elsewhere and growing your business more than you're getting back in shred? Or is there another process for shred that could save you time? I think you'd probably agree, Sydney, with most of the startups we talk to, the time is much more of a valuable asset than money. So understanding where you're spending your time and if that's actually worthwhile.
Absolutely. I think the biggest one, and the like reason again why we find people either like pushing this off or just pushing off, like shred becomes a buzzword. And it's like, I know as a startup, I have to eventually one day figure out what shred is, but I'm not going to take the time to understand what that looks like in terms of setting up a proper infrastructure in my business.
Yeah, I promise you it's worthwhile.
We had a question in the chat just about the eligibility of employees and looking for you to confirm that all employees need to be in Canada.
Yes, yes, all employees need to be located in Canada, taxed in Canada. Yeah, definitely. If you hire like a dev team in overseas, that's not going to be eligible. If you have employees that are working in the States, for example, that's not going to be eligible. They do have to be located in Canada and taxed and, sort of documented out everything above board in Canada.
And that's the same thing for contractors as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm
Yeah.
just keeping an eye on time here too, and I know we'll potentially keep popping your questions in the chat because we'll obviously prioritize that over some of the last content here. But I will chug ahead with just how, from an operating perspective, shred could be approached from your growth forecast and a few FAQs that we get at Profitual on this. One being that I will be the first person to suggest that you have multiple versions of your forecast going at any time, a conservative and a less conservative, a good, a better, a best, whatever that looks like. I think anyone operating with a singular forecast is operating blind. And with that comes, how do you integrate some of the less certain activities? So a very common tenet, I used to be a venture capitalist, used to be an early stage investor, so I bring that hat to this perspective, are companies that would demonstrate their ability to sustain themselves based on bringing in grant funding. Because oftentimes, grants get pulled, they are subjectively awarded. I would never want to see a forecast that suggested that a company could only execute on X, Y, and Z in sales if they brought in grants. SR&ED is I look at a little bit differently because of the predictability that you are able to defend your claims, that there are, calculations that can be done to reasonably understand what your claim could look like, and the fact that companies are eligible to do this annually, that we have an idea that, based on processing times, you are likely to receive that capital 3 months or so after your submission. So best practices from a forecasting perspective, we recommend including your SR&ED claim as other income, government assistance, whatever makes sense to you in your forecast, and simply just slotting that in conservatively, kind of anywhere around that, what that processing time looks like for you. So if, for that 3 months or so plan, by all means, if you're looking for a conservative outlook on cash, you could choose to push that out much further. That way you still have really great visibility on, if your company is in a position where you might be running short on cash before that capital from the CRA comes back to you. The benefit from a growth and a planning perspective, though, and the piece that we really like to analyze here, is that if you're modeling SR&ED correctly, and if you can get into a cadence of really confidently seeing, perhaps as you grow and mature as a bit of a later stage company, that you are year over year receiving, you're year over year successful in receiving your SR&ED capital back, you can actually start to use that assurance to start to strategically think about how you might hire teams earlier, how you might actually increase or project increasing your spend from an R&D capacity without actually increasing the burn of your company, or by which I mean the expenses of your company every month. So if we look at that example of a $100,000 developer, if you are, successfully able to get that salary covered, that employee could actually be costing you annually what looks closer to $35,000 in salaries. Thinking about building of your R&D team this way is one of the reasons why we see so much benchmarking in early stage startup companies for growing out the R&D division of their companies in Canada a lot faster than perhaps their sales and marketing teams and things like that. So really important from a forecasting perspective. Other grants, things that you're kind of one-off applying for, my recommendation would be, less likely that you are including those in your forecasting plans. But from a growth-oriented perspective, always considering when you're thinking about who to hire next, what skills capacity do I need to add on to my team, thinking about how SR&ED can help you get there faster and how you would work that potentially into like a investable narrative, which is what I covered just quickly here on the next slide as well. It's one of our major advantages of being Canadian companies, and I know there's a lot of discourse back and forth right now about Canada and US, but particularly for Canadian companies that are pitching to US investors and are seeing traction with US investors, oftentimes one of the biggest benefits there is that you're able to demonstrate stretching every dollar invested to go so much further when you're leveraging it against some of the amazing Canadian grant programs that we have access to up north that the US companies are not leveraging. So as an example, even in a due diligence conversation, I'm frequently asked, like, how do I handle this or how would I discuss this with investors? It simply is being able to articulate, one, that you're aware enough of the market that you are leveraging SR&ED, or you're at least exploring what that looks like for your company. It just shows that you're aware and that you're efficient and that you're looking to stretch their capital further. And in conversation, that just looks something like saying, hey, we expect that with SR&ED credits, we can actually recover this much annually. And here's how we're going to reinvest that capital and double down to hit our planned milestones and our growth metrics faster. So this is particularly really relevant for companies that are product-led in their growth, or where this pace at which you meet your technical milestones is really crucial for how fast you go to market, which I think is just about everyone.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, we get a lot of questions as well, pretty often about SR&ED and investor conversations. It's so important if you're early to have at least just an understanding of what it's going to look like for you. It's super, super essential, and it also just gives you a leg up, against someone who doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of put a little bit more insights about Profitual here. So we just found that it was such a great overlap here between Profitual and GrowWise. The benefit of SR&ED is just exponential if you can have a strong understanding of how that impacts your forecasting and your cash flow, and just kind of what that looks like in a strategic way. Like Sydney was mentioning, kind of the conservative, the realistic, and the ambitious forecasts. Like having that understanding paired with SR&ED is just going to make your money go so much farther. So we really thought it would be a great kind of overlap here between our two businesses. So if you're not already doing forecasting, definitely reach out to Sydney and look into using Profitual, because it really will help, the way that you're able to use your money and how far it'll be able to go. So yeah.
And I echo it from a GrowWise perspective. If you are doing any level of financial forecasting, you are preparing to fundraise, you are just an operator, perhaps you're bootstrapping, but you really care about cash and just having, from an operator perspective, a high degree of confidence in how to run your business and how to scale bigger, better, faster, and all of the above. You're missing out so deeply as a Canadian business if you are not thinking about how SR&ED factors into that for you. And just really loved connecting with GrowWise, where they are focused on that founder market, that startup market. Their expertise is deep with respect to trying to save you time and how you complete this process, but also ensuring that they're bought into maximizing the claim alongside you as much as possible, which is something that, even as a, operator of startup myself, like that's the level of investment that I would want to see as well. So really, really excellent overlap here, and would highly encourage anyone who's in that forecasting stage. If you are already working with a bookkeeper, or you're in that stage where you're preparing to fundraise, having that awareness of SR&ED and how it can influence your business, having a discussion with the folks at GrowWise is only going to set you up to be more successful when you're navigating that element of how you're being capital efficient with investors as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Sydney. Yeah, I just kind of grazed over that last slide, but basically, SR&ED is a great program, and, take advantage of it. And there's a lot of ways that you can change the way that you're doing your business currently to maximize. So yeah, there's a lot of things that Sydney and I both can help you with. We've got our information pulled up here. Please feel free to reach out, email. I think Sydney's going to pop some links into the chat for booking a meeting. I know we're just about at time, so if there are any questions that we have here, or if you have any questions you'd prefer to just have a quick one-on-one chat about, there's our meeting booking links in the chat there, or just send us an email. We're both here to answer questions and really just help support that understanding, and that, yeah.
Yeah, I've
You guys,
there's links in there for us, Lauren. We did have two quick questions. Both I think are kind of accomplishing the same things, perhaps, but the differences between organizations like IRAP and SR&ED, or SR&ED and other R&D type agencies, support agencies.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. So IRAP works kind of in the traditional sense that you apply, then you get the money, and then you go spend the money. It's a bit more intensive on the front end than SR&ED is. And we find that typically it's a bit more of the companies that are heavy in the research and, sort of traditional research and development companies, like more in the pharmaceuticals, health tech, that sort of space, that are applying for IRAP. And then SR&ED is after the fact, right? So you have to be spending money to get your SR&ED back. So the way that the funding tools work is a bit different. But also just, yeah, SR&ED is kind of a consistent most businesses apply every year. If you are eligible for SR&ED, you consistently are eligible for SR&ED. Typically, you're applying every year. So IRAP is a bit more of like a one-off situation. So they are a little bit different, but you can get both on top of each other. If you had $100,000 in eligible R&D expenses and you got $50,000 in IRAP, then you could technically only have $50,000 in eligible SR&ED expenses. So it does kind of chip away at what's eligible. But yeah, happy to answer more questions on that in a email or in a quick conversation. I know we're at time, so.
Yeah, I think